At the cozy Bella Vista Restaurant, the afternoon was going on normally until the arrival of the wealthy couple, Patrícia and Gustavo, who mocked the atmosphere. When Renata, the kind deaf waitress, approached to take their order, they laughed and imitated her. What they didn't know was that Renata was the owner's daughter from the restaurant. The father, tired of the disrespect, was about to intervene and teach an unforgettable lesson to everyone present. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This story proves that true greatness lies in those who teach with dignity. The clock read 2:30 in the afternoon when the glass doors of the Bella Vista Restaurant opened, letting in a blast of warm air and the muffled sounds of the busy street. The restaurant, known for its sophisticated menu and tranquil atmosphere, was frequented by all types of customers, from humble families to businessmen who came to close deals to the sound of instrumental music. But that day, the serene atmosphere was interrupted by the entrance of a couple who seemed completely out of place with the atmosphere of the place. Patrícia and Gustavo, both dressed in designer clothes and with arrogant smiles, walked between the tables as if they were on parade. Some customers' eyes flicked to them briefly, not out of admiration, but rather discomfort. There was something about their arrogant energy that made the air seem heavier. The couple chose a table near the window. Patrícia. She adjusted her expensive bag on her lap and looked around disdainfully. "Honestly, love, I don't know why you wanted to come here. It looks like one of those neighborhood restaurants." Gustavo gave a restrained laugh. "Relax. I heard the food is good. And who knows, maybe if this place improves its service, we'll invest in it." Before they could continue the dialogue, Renata, a young waitress of about 27, approached with her notebook. Her uniform was impeccable, her hair tied in a simple bun, and a gentle smile framed her face. But there was something different about her, something the couple didn't yet know. Renata was deaf. She communicated through gestures and lip reading, a skill she mastered. Upon seeing the couple, she greeted them with a polite gesture and pointed to the menu. Patrícia arched an eyebrow. "She doesn't talk?" he asked, loud enough for other tables to hear. Gustavo disguised his laughter. "I don't think so. Look, it must be one of those, what's the name? Hearing impaired, right?" Renata, oblivious to the mockery, smiled and made a friendly gesture, indicating that she could take the order. But Patrícia, with that look of someone having fun at the expense of others, decided to prolong the embarrassment. "Oh, so she really is deaf," he said, laughing. "How interesting. Imagine working in a restaurant and not hearing the customers." Some people nearby began exchanging uncomfortable glances. Gustavo, excited by his wife's reaction, decided to join in the game. "Honey, speak more slowly so she can read your lips, or she'll bring the wrong dish." And he gave a laugh that echoed in the room. Renata, she noticed the tone, but kept her expression calm. She understood perfectly what was happening, and yet she chose to remain as gentle as she was. He pointed to the dishes on the menu, waited for each person to respond, and when he finished, he thanked them with a slight nod. The couple continued laughing, exchanging cruel comments between each other. "That is why the world is lost," he said. Patrícia, picking up his cell phone. "They give anyone a job these days." Gustavo nodded in agreement, still laughing. "I bet he's related to the owner. That's the only way to work in a place like that." Their laughter contrasted with the uncomfortable silence at the tables around them. The customers looked on discreetly, indignantly, but no one said anything. Until, from the counter to the back, André, the restaurant owner, watched the scene carefully. He was a middle-aged man with a calm but intense gaze. Nothing escaped his notice, and seeing the way Renata was treated, something in her face changed. With slow and firm steps, André left the counter and walked to the couple's table. Gustavo noticed him approaching but had no idea what was coming. "Good afternoon," he said, André, his voice calm but full of authority. "Is the service okay?" Patrícia River. "It's great. I just thought it was strange that they hired a waitress who can't hear. It must be difficult, right?" The look of André, he stood his ground, but his eyes spoke volumes. He took a deep breath before answering. "The waitress you are ridiculing is called Renata. She is one of the most dedicated employees I've ever had. And, coincidentally, he paused. She is also me daughter. The entire hall fell silent. The couple's laughter froze in the air. Patricia swallowed hard, and Gustavo, who until then had thought he was in control of the situation, felt his face burn. Andrea continued, calmly, "Here we don't judge anyone by the way they speak, walk, or hear. We judge by character. And honestly, I would much rather have a deaf employee with a clean soul than a customer with ears. But no heart." The entire hall had stopped. Not even the clinking of cutlery could be heard anymore. The phrase said, by André, with a calm and firm voice, had crossed the air like a silent thunder. She is my daughter. For a moment, Patricia and Gustavo, they didn't know where to look. The laughter, previously scandalous, now gave way to a frozen expression of embarrassment. To the skin of Gustavo seemed to burn, and Patricia, not knowing what to do, nervously fiddled with the bag, avoiding the owner's gaze. She tried to hide it with a weak laugh, but her voice was shaking. We didn't know. We didn't mean to offend. It was just a joke." André crossed his arms, looking them in the eyes. "It's always just a game," he replied calmly. "Until someone gets hurt. Until someone goes home feeling like they don't belong." He took a deep breath. "And the worst part is that people think the problem lies with those who are different, when in fact, the problem lies with those who refuse to see beyond their own limitations." The look of André was not out of anger, but out of deep disappointment. The room remained silent, and even the other customers, who had previously just been watching, now looked at the couple with a mixture of disgust and embarrassment. An elderly lady, sitting nearby, whispered to her husband, "She is deaf, but she seems to listen to her heart more than most people out there." Renata, who had returned to the kitchen without understanding the extent of what was happening, appeared at the door, confused. He saw his father next to the couple and instinctively felt that something was wrong. His eyes, curious and attentive, searched for an explanation. André gestured with his hand, asking her to stay calm. She just nodded, returning to the kitchen without, imagining that her father had just defended her with the strength of a lion and the calm of a wise man. "Patricia," I tried to regain my pride, but my voice wouldn't cooperate. "Mr. André, it was not our intention to offend anyone." Gustavo completed, "It was a misunderstanding. We just found it curious, you know." André remained motionless. There was something almost impenetrable in his expression. When he spoke, his voice was low, but each word carried the weight of absolute truth. "The curious thing," he said slowly, "is how the people who talk the most about empathy are the ones who practice it the least. You laughed at someone who lives in a world of silence, but you never wondered what it would be like to live that way." He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. "Let me tell you something. Gustavo and Patricia." They looked at each other tensely as he continued. When she was born, the doctors said she would never hear the voice of the world. They said she would be limited. But you know what I learned?" André smiled, his gaze distant. "That limitations aren't in the ears, they're in the soul. She grew up learning to listen with her eyes and speak with her heart. And that's why, for me, she's the most complete person there is." Silence once again took over the room. This time it wasn't the silence of shame, it was the silence of impact. The words of André affected not only the couple, but everyone present. A collective emotion hung in the air, as if everyone there had remembered a time when they had judged without knowing, or laughed at what they didn't understand. Patricia, unable to contain her tears, she murmured, I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, and her watery eyes reflected the weight of guilt. "I didn't know," André replied without raising his tone. "Knowledge is what separates the ignorant from the conscious. But feeling is what transforms the conscious into human beings. What you do from now on is what really matters." Without another word, he walked away. He went to the counter and went back to taking care of the orders, as if nothing had happened. But within Patricia and Gustavo, something had changed. The laughter that had once seemed natural now hurt. The silence of Renata, which had previously made them laugh, now embarrassed them. They looked at each other, and for the first time in a long time they didn't know what to say. It was as if each word they tried to say was too small compared to the damage they had caused. Patrícia sighed. "I've never felt so small," Gustavo agreed. "And I've never seen anyone so great without having to say a word." When they finished their meal, Patrícia got up and went to the counter. André looked up. "I'd like to apologize, I really do," she said, her voice breaking, "and also to thank you." He frowned. "To thank?" "Yes," she replied, wiping away a tear. "Because today I learned what it means to truly listen, even without sound." He watched her for a moment and finally nodded. "So perhaps this was the first conversation your hearts were able to hear." That day, the excellence of Renata spoke louder than any voice, and the shame that Patrícia and Gustavo, they felt it was not just because of the mistake they had made, but because of the blindness that prevented them from seeing the value of people who lived outside the standard they so venerated. The laughter that once hurt now gave way to a transformative silence, the kind of silence that carries weight, reflection, and regret. And for the first time, that couple began to listen. Really. The next day dawned gray. The wind blowing in from the sea brought a gentle chill, as if the city itself were in a state of reflection. Inside the luxury apartment where they lived, Patrícia and Gustavo drank coffee in silence. Neither of them had slept well. What had happened in the Bella Vista Restaurant the night before still echoed in both of their minds like a fresh scar. Every time that Patrícia closed her eyes, she saw the calm and disappointed look of André. Every time that Gustavo remembered the mocking laughter, he felt ashamed of himself. There was no sound more uncomfortable than that internal silence. It was the kind of silence that comes not from the absence of noise, but from the presence of guilt. "We need to do something," he said. Patrícia finally breaking the heavy mood. "I can't just pretend nothing happened." Gustavo sighed. "I thought the same thing. But what can we do? Apologize again? I don't think it will change what happened." She was silent for a few seconds. Then, looking out the window, she answered firmly, "Then we change." That afternoon, the couple returned to the Bella Vista Restaurant. When they walked in, the atmosphere seemed the same. But they were definitely not the same people anymore. The discreet glances of the employees showed that the previous night's episode had not gone unnoticed. Renata was at the counter, organizing orders. When he saw the couple enter, he stopped. For a moment. She recognized them immediately. Her heart raced. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. She still didn't know what had been said between her father and the couple, but she felt there was something unfinished in that story. Patrícia walked towards her hesitantly. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, but none seemed to suffice. Then, in an unexpected gesture, she took a napkin and wrote something with a pen she carried in her bag. When he finished, he pushed the paper toward Renata. On the napkin was written, "I laughed because I didn't know you. Now I want to learn to listen to you." Renata read slowly. For a moment her gaze softened. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need sound to be understood. She took another napkin and replied, writing in a calm hand, "Listening is not about the ears. It's about the heart." Patrícia felt his eyes well up. Gustavo, beside him, swallowed dryly. He never imagined that a few simple words could carry so much weight and so much meaning. When André appeared, noticed the atmosphere between them. His gaze met that of Patrícia, and for the first time there was no tension, only regret. "Are you back?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Gustavo," he responded. "We came back to listen." André raised an eyebrow in surprise. Patrícia took a deep breath and said, "I know I can't undo what I said yesterday, but I can choose to no longer be the person who said it." He watched her for a few seconds and finally nodded with a slight smile. Sometimes silence teaches what words cannot. The couple ordered 2 coffees. It wasn't about the drink, it was about the gesture. Renata, he served them with special care, writing a little note and placing it under the saucer before leaving. When Patricia lifted the cup, read the message, "People change. What matters is when they choose to change." That sentence was etched in her mind for hours. Regret had now turned into something new. Gratitude. It was as if, for the first time she had learned what it was to listen with her soul. Later, when the restaurant began to empty, André approached the couple's table. "Can I sit down?" he asked. Gustavo and Patrícia nodded. He folded his hands on the table and looked at the two of them. "I didn't bring you here to feel ashamed. What happened yesterday was a mirror. Life is full of them. Sometimes we need to see ourselves in an ugly way to start becoming a better person." Patrícia listened carefully. André continued, "Empathy isn't something we're born with. It's something we learn. And when we learn it, everything changes." There was a respectful silence. The couple just nodded their heads in agreement. Renata, watching from afar, I felt that something was changing there. Maybe it wasn't just an apology. Maybe it was the beginning of a true redemption. Before leaving, Patrícia approached again Renata. She said nothing. She just gestured, her hands trembling and her eyes filled with emotion. "Thanks." The girl, with a gentle smile, replied in the same silent language, "You are welcome." And in that instant, Patrícia understood something he would never forget. The true sound of empathy is the silence that arises when the heart speaks louder than the voice. The following days brought a different atmosphere to the Bella Vista Restaurant. Something had changed, not just in the air, but inside the people. The episode between the couple and Renata had spread among the employees, and somehow awakened something no one expected: a collective spirit of empathy. That afternoon, the restaurant was at its usual pace. The tables were full, the waiters bustled about. The smell of fresh pasta and herb sauce mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. But amid the exchanged glances and discreet gestures, there was a new sense of silent respect. Renata, as always, kept a calm smile and an attentive look. She didn't speak, but everyone listened to her. Her presence had become a constant reminder that kindness doesn't need sound, just intention. When Patrícia and Gustavo turned for the third time, no one seemed to recognize them as the same arrogant customers as before. They were different. They wore simple, unostentatious clothes. And most impressively, they carried a serene look, like someone who has learned to observe the world with new eyes. Renata, he recognized them immediately, but there was no hurt on his face, just curiosity. She came closer, and Patrícia, smiling shyly, made a sign with his hands. "Can I sit here for a moment?" Renata nodded. They looked at each other for a few seconds, and it was Patrícia who began to gesture with the help of a small notebook he had brought with him. She wrote carefully, "I want to learn your language." The smile of Renata was instantaneous. She didn't expect that. The surprise in his eyes turned into pure emotion. With his hands, he answered slowly, "Then the world will become more beautiful." That scene was witnessed by other employees and some customers. And it was there, at that discreet table, the chain of forgiveness it started. During the following days, Patrícia, he began to frequent the restaurant, not only as a customer, but as an apprentice. She asked to help serve tables, watched Renata, and tried to imitate his gestures. In the beginning, I made a lot of mistakes. But every mistake was accompanied by sincere laughter, patience, and above all, respect. Gustavo, in turn, began to talk to André, the owner, on the impact of human attitudes in the work environment. He heard stories about people with hearing impairments who faced prejudice on a daily basis and decided to use his influence to do something about it. In a short time, Gustavo began to finance courses of inclusion and accessibility for local restaurants. The idea was simple: teach employees and owners to communicate with deaf customers and colleagues through Libras. The project gained momentum, and soon other establishments began to join in. But the most beautiful thing happened inside the house itself. Beautiful view. One night, Renata organized a small meeting with the employees. With his father's support, he set up a whiteboard and wrote a sentence: "Empathy is the language everyone should speak." She then began teaching her classmates how to do some basic gestures. The entire restaurant was transformed into a makeshift learning room. Laughter echoed through the room as waiters, cooks, and even customers tried to replicate the signs. There was something deeply human at that moment. Patrícia and Gustavo were there, participating as dedicated students. With each gesture learned, they seemed to erase a scar from the past. A few days later, the event took on even greater proportions. André, excited, announced a new program at the restaurant. Every last Friday of the month will be the Day of Silence, a special dinner where everyone is invited to communicate without words, only with gestures, looks, and actions. The idea sounded strange at first, but it soon became a success. The first dinner of silence was a spectacle. The tables were full of people trying to communicate with their hands, laughing at their attempts, discovering the beauty of sight and touch. It was an exercise in empathy, transformed into a sensory experience. Renata watched everything from the counter with a full heart. She never imagined that one day she would be the center of such a big change. It had all started with an act of cruelty, and now it blossomed into collective kindness. At the end of the night, when the lights went out and the last customer left, André approached Renata. He placed his hand on her shoulder and smiled. "Do you realize what you did, daughter?" She frowned, not understanding. He pointed to the hall. "Look around. All of this was born from you, from your silence, your patience, your strength." She smiled, moved. André completed. "Forgiveness is like sound. Even when you don't hear it, it still exists, vibrating in the hearts of the right people." That night, the Bella Vista Restaurant, it was no longer just a place where dishes were served. It was a temple of learning, a mirror of the human soul. The echo of forgiveness spread, and curiously, the quieter it was, the louder it became. Since the day the couple started participating in the dinner of silence, something inside them seemed to slowly awaken. Patrícia and Gustavo, previously so accustomed to superficiality, began to see the world in a new way. They had rediscovered something they hadn't known existed. Then her voice, the one that speaks when the ego is silent and the heart decides to listen. At home, the reflection of this transformation was visible even in the details. Banal discussions about status, money, or appearance gave way to deep conversations about purpose and empathy. The fake laughter, once used to mask the emptiness, now gave way to comfortable silences, full of meaning. The couple who once prided themselves on having everything, now prided themselves only on being different. One afternoon, Patrícia. I was in my room organizing old clothes to donate. As she folded an expensive blouse, she noticed something curious. None of it brought her the same satisfaction as before. She looked in the mirror and for an instant saw herself with the eyes of Renata, a simple woman with a sincere smile and unshakable strength. It was then that he realized happiness was never in what I wore, but in how I saw the people around me. At the same moment, Gustavo entered the room with an envelope in his hands. "Patrícia, look at this," he said, opening the paper. It was an invitation. Renata and André were organizing a charity event called Listen with the Heart, an initiative to raise funds for schools for the deaf. The couple looked at each other and smiled. They knew they needed to be there, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. The event took place 2 weeks later, at the Bella Vista Restaurant. The lights were soft, and the ambient sound was replaced by a calm piano melody. The room was packed with guests, some old clients, some new, all united by a common cause: empathy. Renata went up to the small stage set up in the center of the restaurant. With a sign language translator at his side, he began to tell his story. He talked about how the life of a deaf person is full of invisible challenges, about prejudice disguised as humor, and about how sometimes the worst kind of deafness is that of the soul. Her words, even spoken through her hands, struck deeply. There was something in the way she spoke, a sparkle in her eyes, an almost holy calm. And among the guests, Patrícia, she felt every gesture, every word, as if they were meant for her. When the lecture ended, Renata looked towards the couple and smiled. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. A smile that said, "I forgive you, and I understand you." After the event, Patricia approached her, accompanied by Gustavo. They didn't say anything at first. They just hugged her. It was a long, sincere, silent hug, but full of invisible words. "When you release it," Patricia wrote on a napkin, "you have no idea how much it has changed our lives." Renata replied on the same paper, "Maybe it was the other way around." That night, Gustavo and Patricia, they returned home in silence, but it was a light silence, full of peace. As they drove down the brightly lit avenue, the radio played soft music. At some point, Gustavo commented, "Funny, huh? We talk so much, but we never said anything that really mattered." Patricia smiled, looking at the window glass, where the city lights were reflected, and she, without listening, said everything the world needed to hear. The car drove down the road, and for a moment they both remembered how it all began, the cruel laughter, the embarrassment, the forgiveness, and now it all seemed so distant, like a memory from a past life. In the days that followed, the couple began participating in more social events and awareness campaigns. They weren't looking for recognition. They just wanted to give back what they had received. Gustavo created a digital campaign to encourage companies to hire people with hearing impairments. The name of the initiative was symbolic, the sound of respect. Patricia, in turn, began giving lectures on emotional empathy, telling how prejudice and arrogance had nearly blinded them. People were moved, and she always ended with a phrase that had now become her motto. "Not all deafness is of the ear. Sometimes it is of the soul." One night, while Patricia was writing a new article about inclusion, he received a message on his cell phone. "Era Renata." A photo, her and her father, smiling in the restaurant, with the caption, "Today dinner was in silence, and it was the most beautiful of all." Patricia smiled. That simple message made her understand something that might have gone unnoticed by many. The true voice of life is not in the sound, but in the meaning. And for the first time, she felt completely at peace. The weeks following the event, Listen with the Heart, were marked by something that no one expected. The restaurant beautiful view became news. A video recorded by one of the guests, showing Renata telling his story in Libras and the audience reacting with tears, it went viral on social media. Within a few days, the recording had surpassed millions of views. But what touched people most wasn't the story of hearing loss. It was the message of humanity behind her. Silence, empathy, and forgiveness had become a universal language. Local newspapers began to cover the case. Soon, television stations wanted to interview André and Renata. They were reluctant at first. They weren't looking for fame, just respect. But they realized that visibility could serve a greater purpose, amplify the reach of empathy. During an interview, a reporter asked André, "Do you believe that a restaurant can change the world?" He thought for a moment before answering, "A plate of food can satisfy hunger, but a gesture of respect can nourish a soul." The response spread like wildfire. It was mentioned in posts, lectures, and even awareness campaigns. And interestingly, the beautiful view, previously just a gastronomic point, was now recognized as a symbol of social transformation. About that, Patricia and Gustavo continued to get involved in charitable activities. Their change was so noticeable that even their closest friends found it strange. During a dinner with the old group of colleagues, Patricia was the target of a sarcastic comment. "So now you're a deaf advocate? What a transformation, huh?" She smiled calmly. "No, I just learned to listen." The awkward silence that followed was proof that not everyone was ready to hear what she had to say. But she didn't mind. Did you know that the most profound changes don't need approval? They really need it. No beautiful view, the movement of the Dinner of Silence grew every month. Entire families came to experience the event. Some cried, others left in peace. There was something magical about that moment when words disappeared and only gestures remained. Renata, watching from the kitchen, saw children trying to communicate in Libras, couples smiling in silence, and elderly people getting emotional. She realized that this simple exercise was reteaching the world to feel. On one of the busiest nights, André looked at his daughter and said, with a glint of pride in his eyes, "Did you notice?" She frowned curiously. "What, Dad?" "The world is beginning to listen, and the sound of this change comes from your silence." She smiled, excited, and hugged him. Meanwhile, the project of Gustavo, called The Sound of Respect, began to gain support from companies across the country. Restaurants, cafes, and hotels have adopted the same inclusion model and created workspaces for people with hearing impairments. Some have even implemented their own versions of Day of Silence. The impact was so great that Renata was invited to speak at a conference on accessibility in São Paulo. She was nervous, but determined. In front of hundreds of people, he gave a speech in Libras that was translated for the audience in real time. Empathy isn't about feeling sorry. It's about understanding that the other person exists, and that even without sound, their pain can be heard if your heart is open. The audience rose to their feet in applause. Some wept, others simply remained silent, reflecting. And for a brief moment, it seemed as if the entire audience had learned a new form of language, the language of respect. The press continued to cover every detail of this transformation. But curiously, Renata, André, Patrícia, and Gustavo never let themselves be carried away by fame. They knew that real change wasn't in the cameras, but in the small actions that happened every day, quietly, behind the scenes. And the most beautiful thing was that the movement didn't stop there. Children started learning Libras in schools. Community groups have come together to support families with deaf people. And the Bella Vista Restaurant became considered a landmark in the city, not just for the food, but for what it served beyond the plate: respect, compassion, and humanity. One afternoon, a longtime customer who had witnessed the first incident months earlier returned to the restaurant. He waited for the right moment, and when Renata approached to answer him, made an awkward sign with his hands. She frowned, trying to understand. The man smiled and wrote on a piece of paper, "I learned from you." She read it, looked at it, and smiled with tears in her eyes. It was a small gesture, but for her, it represented the pinnacle of everything she had achieved. Because now, the world was really starting to listen, not with the ears, but with the heart. Time passed, but the echo of dinner of silence kept spreading. What started as a simple experience inside a restaurant had now turned into a social movement. Each month, more people joined the idea, not just to experience a different night, but to connect with what sound has never been able to convey: human feeling. The Bella Vista Restaurant, it was no longer just a gastronomic meeting point. It was a school of humanity. Entire families came from far away to participate in the event. Some brought small children, others came with grandparents. Many, as they left, had tears in their eyes, not of sadness, but of a kind of emotion that purifies. In a distant neighborhood, an elementary school teacher named Helena saw the video of Renata on the internet. She watched it several times, pausing, taking notes, moved. In his classroom, there was a deaf student named Matthew, 8 years old, who lived isolated, shy, and little understood by his classmates. Helena, touched by the story of Renata, decided to change that. The next day, she arrived at school early and wrote on the board, "Today we are going to learn to listen in a different way." The students looked on, confused. She then explained, "Not every conversation needs sound. Sometimes the heart speaks louder than the mouth." And he began to teach some signs of Libras basics that I had learned from videos of Renata. Within a few days, something extraordinary happened. The colleagues of Matthew began to approach, trying to communicate with him. At first, the gestures were awkward but full of intention, and for the first time, Matthew smiled in class. It was a shy but sincere smile, the kind of expression that needs no translation. Meanwhile, in another city, a businesswoman named Laura, owner of a coffee shop, decided to participate in the movement. She had seen an interview of André on Be Deeply Inspired. The following week, he placed a sign at the entrance to his coffee shop: "Here, silence speaks, and everyone is welcome." Additionally, he hired 2 deaf attendants and implemented the Day of Silence once a week. Customers reacted incredibly. Some were surprised at first, others were moved, but everyone left transformed. The movement had become contagious, in the best sense of the word. Back to Beautiful View, Renata observed all this with humility. She never sought recognition. His greatest wish was just live in a world where respect was natural. But seeing so many people changing, so many hearts awakening, was more than she could imagine. One night she received a letter. The sender was a 12-year-old girl named Isadora, resident of a shelter in another city. The letter said, "Hi Renata, I watched your video and learned Libras on my own. Here at the shelter there is a boy who is also deaf, and no one spoke to him. Now we talk every day. I wanted to thank you, because before I thought that only those who spoke loudly were heard. Today I know that sometimes it is in silence that we find love." Renata read those words and cried. He cried in silence, like someone who feels their soul vibrate. The movement she had inspired was touching lives she would never see in person. And in that instant she understood something that not even her father had said in words. The real impact is not in the sound you make, but in the echo you leave. About that, Patrícia and Gustavo continued to expand the project, The Sound of Respect. They began visiting schools, shelters, and businesses, giving talks and workshops on empathy and inclusion. During one of these lectures, Gustavo looked at the audience and said, "One day I laughed at someone for not being able to hear. Today I understand that I was the deaf one. I was the one who couldn't hear anything. Not the other, not life." The audience fell silent, and it was in that silence that he realized his message had been understood. The movement began to gain international prominence. Newspapers from outside the country wrote headlines like, "Brazilian Restaurant Teaches the World to Listen with the Heart," the silence that became a global language. And interestingly, success never went to the heads of anyone involved. Not even Renata, nor of André, nor of Patrícia and Gustavo. On the contrary, the more the world looked at them, the more humble they became. André always said, "The noise of the ego is loud, but the sound of conscience is soft. Only those who live in peace can hear it." At that time, the Beautiful View was already a world reference point, but above all, it remained what it had always been, a home, a place where every dish was seasoned with respect, every gesture was a language, and every silence, a prayer. The restaurant had become the symbol of a generation that was finally learning what it meant truly listen to others. And it all started with a cruel laugh, a laugh that, ironically, gave rise to the most beautiful sound in the world. "I am in regret," turned into love. The success of the movement, The Sound of Respect, had become Patrícia and Gustavo well-known names in the country. Soon, invitations began to arrive from all sides. Lectures, interviews, social campaigns. They had become a symbol of transformation and repentance. But along with recognition came the weight of exposure. In a world where judgment is swift and forgiveness is rare, their past was quick to resurface. An old video, discreetly recorded on the day they mocked Renata, began to circulate on social media. The clip showed the couple laughing, mocking, and gesturing cruelly. The video went viral within hours, accompanied by hateful and outraged comments. The headlines changed tone. A couple leading an empathy movement has humiliated a deaf employee in the past. Hypocrisy? Watch the video that takes down the spokespeople for respect. Patrícia saw the video for the first time alone, on the living room sofa. Her heart raced, and she felt the same chill down her spine that she had felt in that restaurant months ago. It was like reliving a nightmare. Shortly after, Gustavo arrived and found his wife crying silently. Without needing to ask, he understood what was happening. "The video, right?" he asked, sitting down next to her. She just nodded. The next few hours were chaos. Messages started arriving on cell phones, social media, and email. Some people defended them, saying that everyone deserves a second chance. But most attacked them ferociously. They called us fake, manipulative hypocrites. Gustavo turned off his cell phone and took a deep breath. "Funny," he said, bitterness in his voice. "We tried so hard to teach empathy, and now they're judging us as if nothing has changed." Patricia, with red eyes, replied, "Maybe that's the test. Can we apply everything we've learned when we're the victims?" The silence that followed was heavy. There were no easy answers. And for the first time since their transformation, the couple felt vulnerable again, as if the universe wanted to prove whether their learning was real or just convenience. The next morning, Renata called them. In a calm voice of André appeared in the background. "Come to the restaurant," he said. "We have something to talk about." Upon arriving at Beautiful View, the atmosphere seemed the same as always, welcoming, serene. But there was an invisible tension in the air. The employees greeted them warmly, but their looks betrayed concern. André received them in the back office. He sat down in front of them and, without beating around the bush, showed them the screen of his cell phone with the video open. "I've seen this dozens of times today," he said, "and every time I watch it, I'm reminded of how quick the world is to condemn and slow to understand." He looked at Patricia, who was already about to cry. "But what matters isn't the video. It's what came after it." Renata entered the room. He looked at the two of them, took a deep breath, and made a gesture in Libras. "You are not what you did. You are what you chose to become afterward." Patricia covered his face with his hands. Gustavo stood up, his voice breaking. "How can you forgive us again, after all this?" She smiled, saying nothing. André answered for her. "Because true forgiveness is not given out of merit. It is given out of compassion." That same night, the couple decided to publish a response video. No scripts, no edits, no rehearsed excuses. Just them, sitting side by side, looking directly at the camera. "Patricia," it started. "Yes, the video is real. We were those people. And it's painful to see what we were capable of doing." Gustavo completed. "But what the video doesn't show is what happened next. It doesn't show forgiveness. It doesn't show love. It doesn't show the silence that taught us to listen." They didn't try to justify it. They just told the truth. The video was posted at midnight. The next day, the comments changed. Thousands of people began leaving messages of support. Some said, "Mistakes don't define who we are. Regret does." Others wrote, "I also laughed at someone different one day. Thank you for making me think." The tide had turned again. But more important than public opinion, the couple understood something essential. True repentance does not seek absolution. Search coherence. A few weeks later, during the next dinner of silence, Patricia was invited to give a brief speech. She walked up onto the small stage, looked out at the audience, and wrote on a board beside her, "The whole world heard what I said wrong, but I hope now he sees what I'm trying to do right." The entire hall applauded, silently. Some cried, others just smiled, and among the audience, Renata watched with pride, knowing that the learning had been completed. That night, as they left the restaurant, Gustavo looked up at the sky and said, "The universe is really curious." Patricia frowned. "Why?" "Because he taught us to listen, and now he is teaching us to be heard." She smiled, but without shouting. "Exactly," he replied. "The voice of regret is quiet, but it is the one that echoes most loudly in the heart." And with that sentence, they walked together down the sidewalk, side by side, in peace. Not because the world had forgiven them, but because they had finally learned to forgive each other. The Bella Vista Restaurant, it remained open, but now what was happening inside transcended the concept of serving meals. The place had become a sanctuary of empathy, where people went not just to eat, but to feel. The walls held stories, laughter, tears, and reunions. Each corner carried memories of those who had learned the meaning of respect there. Time passed, and the restaurant grew in reputation and purpose. But André always repeated, "Bella Vista isn't mine. It belongs to the world. It belongs to everyone who believes the heart speaks louder than the voice." And this philosophy was being carried forward in ways he had never imagined. One afternoon, the restaurant was quieter than usual. The sun streamed through the large windows, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. Renata was sitting at the corner table, correcting notes for a new Libras course she had created for employees and customers who wanted to learn. That's when a little boy approached timidly. He was about 8 years old, wearing a school uniform and an innocent smile. In his hand he carried a crumpled note. Renata looked at him and smiled. The boy hesitated, then handed over the paper. She opened it and read, "Hi, my name is Raphael. I'm deaf too. I saw your story on TV. I want to be like you." The tears came before she could stop them. She looked at the boy, who was now watching her expectantly, and wrote something back on a napkin. "You're already better. Because the world needs more people like you." The boy smiled and made a small gesture with his hands that meant thanks. At that moment, something lit up inside Renata. A new purpose. She realized that the movement was no longer just a project. It was a living flame, which was now being passed into other hands. Days later, André found his daughter sitting at the counter, thoughtful. "Is everything okay?" he asked, wiping his hands on a dish towel. She nodded, but her eyes were teary. He pulled out the ticket from Raphael from his, pocket and handed it to his father. He read slowly, a proud smile forming on his face. "Do you understand what this means, daughter?" he asked, his voice breaking. She wrote on a piece of paper that now silence has heirs. He laughed, moved. That's exactly it. They hugged each other. And at that moment the silent restaurant hall seemed more alive than ever. About that, Patrícia and Gustavo continued their journey. Now, they traveled the country, giving lectures on inclusion and empathy. But, unlike in the beginning, they no longer just talked about what they had done. They talked about what was still to be done. Once in an interview, the reporter asked Patrícia, "Do you believe that the world can change with empathy alone?" She smiled. "Not just with empathy, but with examples. Empathy is the sound, and examples are the echo." His words spread, being replicated on social media, programs, and even classrooms. But for her, nothing was more important than the moment she returned to Beautiful View, sat in silence with Renata, and simply shared a coffee without having to say a word. There, in the silence, there was more truth than in any speech. On a Saturday night, André decided to organize something special, the Dinner of Silence in honor of hope. This time, there would be no celebrity guests or press. It would be just an intimate celebration with employees, friends, and people who had been touched by the movement from the beginning. The hall was filled with lit candles. The tables, covered with white tablecloths, reflected the soft light. On the improvised stage, Renata got up, looked around, and started talking with his hands. Everyone was attentively following the translation on a big screen. "I used to think silence was a punishment. Today I know he is a gift, because it was in him that I found the most beautiful sound in the world, the sound of hope." The audience rose to their feet, applauding silently. It was one of those moments that don't need words to be eternal. After dinner, André and Renata were left alone in the empty hall. The candles were already extinguished, and the night wind blew gently through the open windows. André looked at the ceiling and muttered, "Who would have thought, huh?" It all started with a mocking laugh, and ended with a world learning to listen. Renata took his father's hand and wrote on the palm, "Nothing ends, Father. Love only changes its voice." He smiled and hugged her. The restaurant, lit only by moonlight, seemed to breathe with them, as if the walls held the invisible sound of all the hearts they had learned to listen to. That night Renata wrote in his diary, "Silence is the bridge between error and forgiveness, between pain and healing, and between prejudice and love, because it is in it that the heart learns to speak." She closed the notebook, smiled, and fell asleep peacefully. I knew that what had started there, in that little restaurant, would never be forgotten, because the silence of hope, it never goes out. It just changes direction, guiding those who have the courage to listen. Time passed, the seasons changed, and the Bella Vista Restaurant, which was once a scene of shame and learning, was now an eternal symbol of empathy and humanity. Tourists from all over the country visited the place, not just for the food, but for the story that the walls silently told. At the entrance, a new sign had been installed, simple and elegant, with letters engraved in steel. Here, silence speaks, and respect. is the only language everyone understands. The sign shone in the sunlight, reflecting the essence of the place. For many, it was just a nice phrase. But for André, Renata, Patrícia and Gustavo, those words carried everything they had experienced: pain, regret, forgiveness, and transformation. That morning, the restaurant was busier than usual. It was the birthday, often years, of the Dinner of Silence, and the entire city had mobilized to celebrate the date. City Hall put up banners in the hall. Streets, schools organized events in honor of inclusion, and even churches and temples held silent prayers for the movement that had taught so many people to listen without having to speak. Inside the restaurant, Renata organized the final details of the special night. Now, she was no longer just the kind, patient waitress. She was the founder of a National Institute for Empathy and Inclusion, which bore his name and taught Libras for free throughout the country. The institute trained interpreters, trained teachers, and connected people with stories like hers. André, older, watched from afar, with the same serene pride he always had. The gray beard and wrinkles on his face only highlighted the sparkle in his eyes. He knew his mission had been accomplished. What started as a neighborhood restaurant had become a seed of humanity, planted in the heart of the world. During the night, the hall was packed. Lit candles illuminated the room, and guests waited for the ceremony to begin. At the center of the stage, Renata went up, accompanied by Patrícia and Gustavo. The three looked at each other knowingly. The past, once marked by cruel laughter, had now transformed into a deep and inspiring friendship. Patrícia was the first to speak. "When I first arrived here, I thought my voice made me important." He paused. "Today I know that silence is what made me human." The audience, moved, applauded silently, raising their hands in a gesture of respect. Renata, he took the microphone, not to speak, but to signal. On the screen, the words were being translated. "Silence taught me what speech never could, that the heart does not need sound to be heard." The phrase echoed in the minds of everyone present. And then, Gustavo. He came closer, placing his hand on her shoulder. "You changed the world, Renata," he said, his voice breaking. "And you didn't even have to say a word." She smiled, moved. André, at the back of the room, discreetly wiped away a tear. For him, that was the true sound of victory, the sound of human transformation. After the event, the audience began to disperse. But Renata, he stood there, watching the empty tables and the candles slowly dying out. The restaurant was silent, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of fullness, a silence full of meaning, which seemed to speak to the heart. André approached slowly and placed one of his hands on her shoulder. "Are you ready for the next phase?" he asked, smiling. She nodded and replied with a gentle gesture. "Empathy doesn't end, it just changes homes." He laughed. "Then it's good to know that the world will still listen to you." The two hugged each other. Outside, the city slept peacefully, but within the beautiful view, the echo of the stories lived there continued to pulsate, an invisible but eternal sound. Months later, the Renata Institute of Empathy and Silence opened a new headquarters. The building, modern and welcoming, had an entire wall dedicated to the phrase that started it all. Silence also speaks. There, photos of students, teachers, and families covered the mural, representing the impact that movement had caused. And, in the center, an image, Renata and Raphael, the little boy who inspired her, smiling side by side, communicating with their hands, but connected by their souls. That same day, Patrícia and Gustavo visited the institute. They walked through the halls, watching children happily learning sign language. Patrícia smiled, excited, and whispered to Gustavo, "Funny, we started this story trying to be heard, and we ended up teaching others to listen." He replied with a serene smile, "And maybe that's the sound of redemption." They embraced, letting the afternoon sun stream in through the windows, illuminating the institute's corridors. It was proof that when repentance is true, it generates life, and life, in all its forms, is the most beautiful sound in the universe. Silence has power. It teaches what pride keeps silent. True repentance doesn't need to be Explained, it is proven in actions. And whoever learns to listen with their heart will never laugh again at what they don't understand.